It's been a really packed content theatre, so good that Ectron's been associated with that. If you don't know, if you haven't, this is the first time you've been here, Ectron provide a web content management and customer experience platform, so very much enabled to help with what Bob was talking about building an inbound website, so please come and see us. So for the last session today, I'd like to introduce Nick Suckley, who'll be talking about disruptive technology and the role of content. He's from Agenda 21, so I'll hand over to Nick.
Actually, I might grab that, it might be easier. Okay. So I've been asked to talk about... Can everybody hear me okay, by the way? Yeah, is that okay? Can you hear me better there? Is that working better? Is that better? Okay, got it. I need to hold it quite high. So I've been asked to talk about the role of content and its disruptive nature. And what struck me was that 20 years ago when I first started my first job, I didn't actually have a computer on my desk. And thinking back, what my job was going to be like or how I actually worked at that time was quite insane. And I was thinking for anybody travelling, coming to London, how... Going back 15, 20 years ago, how would somebody coming from abroad actually have even known what the weather was like in London when we didn't have the internet? So the point I was going to make was that content hasn't really changed that much, but the technology that we're using has changed actually out of all proportions. So I'm going to take on a little bit of a historical journey. Germany, 1460. There's a blacksmith called Johann Gutenberg, and he invented the first printing press. And what was revolutionary about it was that it had movable type, which meant that he could quickly and easily print new things and chop and change things. But what was revolutionary about it wasn't actually that he built a printing press. It was actually the Bible that he made as a consequence. So the first Bible made with movable type. And what was revolutionary about it was that it democratized content, that it meant that Bibles were no longer restricted just to monasteries, but actually they could spread around far more widely and far more dispersed. So let's fast forward a couple of hundred years. New York, 1960, Madison Avenue. At a time when a lot of Americans were driving around in great big V8s, the idea that a small car from Europe with the engine slung out the back was a bit of an anachronism, and an agency called Doyle, Dane and Bernbach, DDB, thought, well, actually, let's play to this car's strengths. So at a time when newspapers and magazines had been around for decades previously, they produced an ad that had lots and lots of white space. Think small was the strapline. And the idea that you could play to the virtue of a small car from Europe that was a bit quirky and a bit funny was absolutely revolutionary. And again, the idea is that by focusing on simplicity, when at a time a lot of press ads were very much about product announcements and very copy-heavy, this was a very, very revolutionary way of dealing with press, even though the medium had been around for decades. So the idea that content is revolutionary, I don't actually buy. People have always wanted good, interesting things to look at. It's the technology that changes, excuse me, and it takes time for us all to catch up. So I've got a few thoughts to go through with people whilst we talk about content. So in terms of our everyday jobs, start with your consumer. This is obviously what Steve Jobs said, start with your customer experience and work back, but I think it applies equally to the kind of content that we're working through. So the question for me is, do you really understand what it is that your customers or your consumers are really interested in? And are you therefore producing stuff that is going to be relevant to them? Technology is removing barriers, of course, but the question I'd ask is, just because you can doesn't actually mean that you should. And there's an interesting study from the University of California in San Diego that says that the average American is exposed to about 100,500 words every single day. That's every single day. So in effect, something like 3/4 of Americans' waking time is spent consuming information. So the idea that you can produce content easily, quickly and cheaply when you're up against that volume of stuff that you're competing with, forget it. It's completely a lame thought. So, checklist. Oops. What are the intractable problems that your customers face in doing their job? And what I mean by that is, what are the really hard, fundamental things that your customers want to find out more about, want to find out more with? Audit the content that you've got. So what do you already have? And what I'm amazed at when we look at a lot of companies we work with is the degree to which there's an awful lot of information scattered around within the organization, whether it is press releases, whether it's instruction manuals, customer information, customer content. So audit what you've got internally, because that stuff actually, in a lot of cases, is gold dust, absolute gold dust. Once you've identified the intractable problems, start producing stuff that is really, really good. And above all, do it well or don't bother at all, because you're up against so much other stuff and so much other noise that unless you cut through, forget it, it's not even worth the effort. So an example I use is rather arcane, but if you think about a design engineer who's making a new paper shredder, what is it that he's going to want to find out? Is he going to be interested in very, very specific information about different types of chips and semiconductors, or is he actually going to be more interested in what other paper shredder manufacturers are actually building? And actually, what is it that people want from those? So I think the idea that you can take content and understand what people are looking for informs an awful lot more about what you should be producing. Example. We work with Matalan and their TV production company and BB8's their agency. And what we identified with Matalan was that, of course, women predominantly are their shoppers. Of course, women want fashion advice. But what we found was that they're not in the haute couture market. So what we did was we started producing everyday real life fashion. So the girl here you can see is Kat Byrne. She is the style editor of Closer magazine. And what we did was we started producing every week with Atomized BBH's production company, effectively a weekly magazine type show that ran on YouTube. And what we also did was we ran it with ITV, so it tied in with This Morning, and we also ran it with Bauer, so it went into print as well. And the idea was that it was talking about different trends, different fashions, different advice. And we then played it out through YouTube, through ITV, through SEO. We SEO'd the hell out of the videos as well. And in terms of whether it worked or not, we took 10% of their TV budget, and that funded the production and the media around this. So for no extra spend, we produced all this work for Matalan. And for no extra spend, we found over the period that we launched this that online sales rose by about 46%. So it really, really worked. So the idea that we were able to produce something for no extra cost for them and it worked was fantastic. We're quite proud of that one. So, trends and fads. What do you want people to do as a company? And I mean, what do you really, really want people to do? Because I'm assuming that most people want consumers, customers to buy stuff. And the role of content is really in getting people from A to B, from where they are through to buying. So content really only drives awareness, and I think the key thing is to say that content is about how wide you drive that awareness really is down to how widely you distribute that content. So for instance, when I'm talking about trends and fads, social media, there's no doubt, is a macro trend, and an important one at that. But within that, there are a whole heap of fads that come and go. So for instance, hands up anybody who recently looked at Second Life, for instance. So these things come and go. So I doubt Pinterest or Snapchat for a lot of people are probably going to be that much interest sitting here right now. So the question is, what are the mandatories in terms of content once you've identified what it is that your customers are interested in terms of where you start to distribute this? So, mandatory content checklist. Of course your site is your home. How many sites, though, are in order? You've got to make sure that it's in order, both from a customer experience point of view, but also from an SEO point of view. YouTube is a massive, massive area. You don't need me to tell you that. But also, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, is Google+. And unfortunately, I say that because from a consumer point of view, it's still debatable. Within my SEO team back at the ranch, it's debatable whether Google+ actually has a role to play for people, unless you're a photographer. But actually, from an SEO point of view, it has a very, very big impact. But we've got areas that I call niche mandatory. So, for instance, in B2B, yes, LinkedIn. Reddit is a really interesting area, and the number of Reddit sub-communities that are out there, from the arcane to the ridiculous, is absolutely amazing. But as a distribution platform, it is amazing. Native advertising, I'll come and talk about a little bit later, but things like Outbrain. But unless you're in the B2C market, Facebook, Twitter is a well-trodden path, and whatever. But I think the key point here is successful companies, once they've built out good quality content that really beats their customers or delivers on their needs, will understand where and how to distribute this content best. But they won't get drawn up or tied up in terms of faddy communication networks. But do not forget your own sites as being really, really important in this. Right, I've skipped. I'm going to have to skip back. Order's gone a bit funny. Number 3, where's Google heading next? So we see a lot of customers coming to us trying to game the system. And Google knows far better where Google is heading than certainly I can tell you. And I suspect where probably anybody in this room can tell you as well. I get also a lot of questions as well around whether SEO is dead or is it alive, is it good, is it bad? And the honest answer is I don't know, but I know one of my biggest growing teams is my SEO team. So what our customers are buying will tell you an awful lot. What I do know is, though, that the days of gaming the system are long behind us. And the idea that you can just build up certain numbers, whether it be links or likes or number of articles distributed, it's far, far behind us. And I think you need to realise that quick wins are precisely just that. They're serendipity. So if you can get some of these quick wins in, it's brilliant, pure fluke, but you can't build a long-term strategy in terms of that. So the question for me then is, what does success look like? And when you think about it and we reverse engineer what Google's aim is really just to get people to the stuff that they're looking for as quickly and easily as possible, and then to get the hell out of the way. So Google's actually aim is not that much different to the aims that we have here as well. So, checklist. Don't get into an arms race with Google. Funnily enough, we put graduates and people with, a couple of years' experience in the market onto the kind of job of trying to understand where best to distribute content and produce it. And what did Google put on this job? They put NASA scientists. So the idea that we can field junior people with inexperience up against really, really smart people is insane. It's absolutely nuts. Don't get into an arms race with Google. Actually focus your effort on better fulfilling your customers' needs by producing the right stuff and then distributing it in the right way. But from a Google point of view, also make it easy for machines to understand. So successful companies will make it easy for machines to understand. So correctly categorize, correctly classify. Let Google get on with its own job and make it easy for people to find what they want. So the next time you're presented by any of your teams or you're presented with a piece of technology, ask yourself this question: does this technology help my customers get either the information or get to the place that they're interested in getting to really, really quickly and really, really easily? Because if the answer is no, put it down the list, park it. I'll show you what wrong looks like, shall I? So this is Interflora SEO traffic, starting towards the back end of 2011, running into 2012, into 2013. So bumping along around there quite happily. Somebody or something, I don't quite know what, whether it's a new agency doing SEO or a new individual, starts here. Okay, feeling quite good about themselves, doing a good job. Uh-oh, this is what happens. This is what comes of gaming the system. So whatever it was that was being done to raise this, when Google reshuffled the deck, and I think it was with their latest update or the update they did back in February, they were ranked right down the list. And that, for me, if I was working here or I was running this business, I would absolutely hit the roof. Obviously, it jumps back up again because Interflora are quite a big PPC spender, but for me, this is what wrong looks like, and this is what comes of gaming the system. Focusing on short-term rather than doing what is the hard stuff, which is actually understanding their customers and doing the right thing for their customers rather than just short-term. So the problem is when you've got an oh dear situation like this, or oh shit if you're in the work, is Google is going to get on and do whatever it wants to do. You can choose to fight it or you can choose to play along with it. The smart companies, in my mind, will understand where Google are heading and understand that Google's desire is actually very consistent with what we want, which is getting people to what they want, and we will be acting and working accordingly. Okay, so in terms of making content accountable, we've talked about what to produce and understanding your consumers, we've talked about distributing, we've talked about the effect of Google in all of this, but in terms of making content accountable, one of the things that really strikes me is that we've mostly, all of us have got either monthly, quarterly, 6-monthly, annual targets, and yet success is a long-term thing. And actually, funnily enough, I had an SEO joke like this as well, but I wasn't sure which one to put. I could put the other one up as well if you're interested, but I quite like that. Its accountability is 87, whatever that is. So the problem is that success being a long-term thing means that either those companies that are successful in the long term are those best able to meet their customers' need, obviously, or, as we've seen through the recession, they're the last people standing. But the problem is that very often we're responding to an always-on world where we've got activity that's running permanently, consistently. We're responding to an always-on world in the long term with very, very short-term tactics. And that just strikes me as completely bonkers, because ultimately, Google is pretty good at what it does, but it is an imperfect proxy for customer behavior. It is not perfect. Google's algorithms, however sophisticated they are still not very good at understanding and decoding the kind of stuff that our customers want. So the problem we've got is how do you ensure as a business owner or as an operator that we don't get knocked off course with short-term, new, sparkly things coming over here when we've actually got long-term customers, long-term trends, not fads, and long-term business things. And the checklist for me is really saying, how do you ensure that you have the right team in place? So, for instance, when we go back to that Interflora example, within an SEO team that I've got, there are an awful lot now of people who used to be building links who are now looking for work elsewhere because Google decides suddenly link building isn't as valuable as it was, link builders are all out of a job, and then we're all into content production. So if everybody's chasing content production, actually anyone could produce content, so produce good stuff because that's hard. Doing easy stuff, well, you'll get found out in the long term. I think most companies should be building in quality of content as a benchmark. How you build quality as a benchmark is going to vary based on your own individual businesses, but I think rather than the number of things that go out or rather than how frequently we get stuff out, building quality in there. Quality as measured by customers, either liking it, loving it, reading it, spending time with it, I don't know. It's going to vary depending on what you do. But you've got to recognise that content only does half the job. It only drives the visibility. That's only half the story. So the second half of the story is understanding how does content drive sales or conversion or whatever it is that you want people to do. And when I'm out there asking my team, the question I'm asking my people is, in which ways, and I say ways, not ways, multiple, does our content drive sales? And if my guys are coming back and saying, I don't know, or I can't substantiate it, or the client really likes it, that's not good enough, quite frankly. Example, Jury's Inn, hotel chain, based in Ireland. They're not a market leader, and they are working hard to grow their business. And we set out on this job to understand what it is that people want to know when they're staying in a hotel. Not what we thought people wanted to know, but what they really wanted to know. And you know what we found out? We found things like people wanted to know, well, what's the proximity of the hotel to local things? When I'm walking or taking public transport or by foot, where do I park? People wanted to know. How long will it take me to get to ... Where can I eat? And surprisingly, is the Wi-Fi any good? So the idea that hotels have Wi-Fi, yeah, most people do, most places do, but actually, is the Wi-Fi good enough for me to do what I want to do? Toiletries and stuff like that, not important at all, was what we found out. So what we've been doing then is we've been building content for a website, we've been building infographics, we've been building guides for some of the larger hotels. And you know what it's done? By running this content for juries in, their conversion rates have increased by 25%. Just as a consequence of answering the really intractable questions, and not even that difficult, quite frankly, but just that we took the time and trouble to go out. So conversion rate from 4%, 5%, whatever the figure was, but it is a 25% increase in conversion rate. So what questions are your customers asking? And going back to this paper shredder guy, or whatever your customers are asking, are they interested in what you think they're interested in?